Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I'm gonna get back to having me at the start of the videos again. I just need to find a way to import it without it going really blurry, because I do record them in quite good quality but they come out a bit funny, so I hope you don't mind that, and I'm gonna get back on that soon. So I'm getting gradually less busy, which is quite good, so I can start adding in more and more new stories. Comment below and let me know what kind of stories you'd like to see me do next. I've also changed my submissions email to a Gmail one, and that's in the description here, so if you want to send me any stories or anything, you can send it over there. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoyed these stories. Take care. So for some introduction, from the time I was around 4 years old, I lived in the forest in a fairly remote part of Virginia. I'm obviously not going to disclose the exact location, but I can tell you. I was only about an hour away from DC, in an area where everybody swears they're from Northern Virginia, but they're usually not. The main thing to understand is that I was so far removed from civilization that I never had access to Wi-Fi or internet. Even now, there isn't any availability from my cell phone. It's literally a dead zone in a world full of technology. Now that I've moved away to attend college, however, I have access to all the bandwidth I could ever desire, so you're hearing this now. So I have a few stories that I hope you enjoy. So, the earliest story is from when I was around 8 years old. Our house sat just off the road, but the trees were so thick that you can never see it if you weren't looking for it. Now my parents owned about 55 acres of land, almost entirely forest, and our closest neighbours a pretty good distance away. Probably about half a mile down the road, but only a few hundred yards if you walk straight through the woods. We had dozens of trails leading into the woods around our yard, and they all covered about 50 yards into the woods in a giant field. Surrounded by forests on all sides, we had our septic tanks buried. If you know, you know. Now, from this central hub of the trails, you could see onto our neighbour's property, so I knew very soon after we moved in that they kept goats there and other livestock in the fields behind our home. Frequently, the goats would find their way through the wired fence and end up following us into the trails, usually to our backyard. This happened every couple of weeks, and it was usually the same goat. We started calling him Bubbles. We would just go and yell, "Bubbles, go home." At that moment, it would always retreat down and quickly get out of sight. So one Saturday, I was sitting home alone and I looked out back and saw a fairly familiar shape coming down the trail. Thinking it's Bubbles, I walk out the back door, prepare to shout like an idiot at this dumb farm animal until it went home, or at least into the woods to do whatever goats do. However, as it got closer, I realised that it didn't recognise me, and I don't recognise this goat. Bubbles has grey fur with a black spot on her eye. This goat was black as midnight, so much so that I can't really see its eyes. Growing tired of these random goats constantly invading the yard, I decided to walk back and try and get this goat to wherever it come from through the fence. As we start down the trail, I noticed that the usual ambient sounds of the forest are very quiet. I couldn't hear them, but they sound distant now, like all the animals have actually evacuated the forest. We hit the trail hub and I noticed that it's now dead silent, no animal noises, nothing. I also noticed that there's no other animals at all on the neighbour's property, which is really strange. I wish I could say my instincts told me to leave, but nah. I was a confident 8-year-old. I could use karate I learned from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to go toe-to-toe with Superman as far as I'm concerned. But then, I start to hear it. At first no louder than a whisper. Someone's talking. I don't know where it's coming from, but it seems to come from all around me. I could just hear. Barely. "Come here, boy, come here." So being the fearless 8-year-old I am, I say, "Who's that?" Now apparently, that's the wrong answer. The woods around me exploded with noises that I can only describe as a sound of a bass guitar when you tune it down and play incredibly low sounds. I could feel percussive notes going through my body. I immediately start running for my house, screaming as I reached the edge of the clearing. I looked back, saw the goat standing. It was on its rear legs with its front legs up, like a dog trying to reach above its head. It was staring at me, and I ran faster than I've ever ran before. When I got home, my dad was already there, and I told him about the goat. He said, "You've seen them before. They do it all the time, it's Bubbles." I didn't press the matter further, knowing that he wouldn't actually believe me, but this entire ordeal just scares the life out of me. Now, the second story is from my high school days. We had nothing to do besides get drunk and have a sober friend drive us home when we act obnoxious. Now, we'd actually heard a story that the property near my house was haunted, and there was a ghost that would chase people around the driveway. We had nothing better to do, so we decided to head straight over there, and we set out at around 11 PM to try and find this place. Turns out it's a lot easier than I thought. The house stuck out like nobody's business. It was the strangest looking thing I've ever seen. The whole thing was shaped like a 30-foot tall bay window. One side actually sticks out, and the other side is completely flat, like somebody took a hexagon pillar and split it perfectly in half. It was maybe 3 stories high, with an attic, and the way it faced the road, it looked like it was staring into the distance, if that makes sense. Now as we pull up, I can actually see a light coming from the top of the window. It looked like somebody's pointing a laser pointer, and my first thought is that it's one of my friends having a laugh with us, until I realised it was wrong. It was a ball, about the size of a golf ball. It must be one of them cheap glow sticks, in a shade of neon green. I then assumed the house was populated and that somebody's inside, with the sole intent of messing with us. Until it starts floating. It started zipping around the outside of the window, darting back and forth so quick that I can see the trail of the after image long behind it. We're all caught in this kind of trance watching the ball, like cats watching a laser pointer. Finally it occurred to me that we should not be here, and this is not normal. I yelled out to my driver to reverse now. I guess my yelling broke his trance, and the next thing I remember, we're blazing down the road full of nerves, faster than we've ever been going before. We are still all locked in onto the ball, which is now darting towards the vehicle. Just as we left the driveway, the ball stopped and made a clockwise turn in the air and snapped back into the windows like a slingshot. We made it back to my place without any other incident. However, I can tell you that all of us slept with the light on that day. So I had the weirdest night ever. Left the concert and a car ended up behind us for a ridiculously long time. And the concert was an hour away from home, and home is 15 minutes away from the city. So pretty dark and spaced out between forests. So we start home after the show and get stuck in traffic. Driving through the small town, we're on a long dark wooded road and a car speeds up to us. The car doesn't stop, and we go in the speed limit, and the car behind us is speeding up to almost hit us, slowing down, repeating, then has high beams on, off, speeds up, slows down. So when we see high beams on the highway, it usually means that we should move over. Now this is a 2-way road with no passing signs, and we slow down but they don't pass. They continue. So we're thinking, alright, some drunk person's being insane. We're continuing down the long dark road home. Our turn is up ahead and we put on our turn signal, but so do they. I say wait, keep going, turn off the signal, and they turn theirs off and keep going. The GPS comes on and says we have to reroute our turn. We turn on our turn signal late and turn quick, but so do they. My boyfriend starts freaking out. The car starts driving beside us but doesn't pass. They move back and forth between oncoming traffic and our lane, going on for about 4 miles. I call the police. They ask my name, I tell them the situation, and they ask my location, the road and direction, etc. We hit a main intersection in a town at this point. The person passes us, doesn't stop for the red light and continues on. I figure it's a drunk person, but at this point I'm on the phone with the police and tell them they're past us and are not following us the same way. We very quickly see lights and lots of police come, and then they pull over halfway in the road. We drive past them, careful not to hit them or oncoming traffic. We pass and figure it's done now. The car peels behind us though, intent on following us, stalking us like before. We hit a state police intersection and 2 police cars pull them over. I still have no explanation to this day exactly what happened. My family's been hunting for years. It's a tradition with us. This is a story about the second time I went elk hunting. Jurgen. We live in Wyoming, and there are tons of places to hunt elk around here. We're basically on a battle mountain, right on the Wyoming-Colorado border. We were hiking down to a small ravine. It's a long hike and we've already come a few miles now. At this point, we're getting a bit tired. Now there's all kinds of animals here, bears, wolves, coyotes, all kinds of things. The only 2 that we're really that worried about are mountain lions and bears. Now, I've heard stories about people being stalked by mountain lions, but never imagined I'd be one of them people it happened to. So we're hiking when I hear a sound, and this sound is like nothing I've ever heard before. At first I believe it's some idiot on a dirt bike, but the sound rises in pitch and transforms into a snarl. Then my dad, brother and I freeze. There is something about the sound that makes your legs stop moving, and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and you become hyper aware. We stood there for about 30 seconds, but let me tell you, it felt like a lot longer. We gave each other's looks as though, are you going crazy, or am I? Now this is the most scary moments of my entire life. And I never actually saw this lion. It was in the ravine. It echoed like crazy. An unseen fear is the worst I can think of. Needless to say, we quickly get back the rest of the hike, and we never went back there. The area is beautiful, but I'm not going to return. Now when I was younger, I was used to getting in trouble for exploring dangerous places by my mum. But I thought it would all stop when I got older. Now for some background, I live in Germany, and when I was young, I loved to explore abandoned World War II bunkers, or sometimes Cold War ones. Now this one particular day, when I was around 20 years old, there was a certain bunker that my friend wanted to go to that he'd seen in the forest before. So we set out one afternoon, and we can't find it. We're literally out there for a good 2 hours and we can't find anything. I tell my friend that we have to get back before it's dark, but just like that, he smiles and says, "Hey, look over there." And to my left I can see a small hatch entrance to a bunker. Now, the strange thing about this bunker is it almost looks like it's pristine. Like it's not from World War II, but yesterday. Now, my friend is very quick to open up the bunker and leaves the hatch clear for us to get out of. He goes down with his flashlight and, honestly, it's one of the biggest bunkers I've ever seen. It seems like it goes on for miles, but many of the doors we can't actually open. What's worse is my friend's flashlight goes out. It doesn't matter, I have one of those chargeable ones, but it's not doing much. So in between the sounds of me charging up the torch, constantly cranking it, echoing through the walls, and my friend laughing, saying how good this is, I can feel a strange sense of unease that I cannot shake. We enter through one abandoned corridor, and my stupid torch goes out. Now in that moment, I think my friend's talking to me in German, saying, "Yes, but we haven't got much time now." But then I hear somebody else reply to him, and I suddenly realise it's not my friend talking to me. He's just as silent as I am. He grabs me by the arm and I start shaking. We can literally hear a group of people talking in formal German voices all around us now. My friend looks at me and whispers we have to run, and with that, we can hear a loud slamming sound from somewhere down the corridor. Suddenly it's black now. My heart drops, and we start sprinting the way that we've come. I can't believe this, some idiots closed the door on us, my friend says. I think it's just my friend playing a prank on me, saying come on, stop, I'm terrified, but the look on his face tells me this isn't a joke. I can barely see anything now with my flashlight just starting to work again. It takes two of us to pry the door open, and the voices sound like they're following us now. We really quickly close the door behind us and sprint out of there. The craziest thing about this experience is that we know for a fact this bunker was completely abandoned. I don't know why my chargeable torch went out in that moment, and we've never been able to find the bunker again to this day, even though we've been to the exact same spot again after. When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, which are extra high voltage, the kind on top of the steel towers. Those are transitional lines, not sub-transitional like most inner city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm in 2008 to go out and repair some lines near Colorado and the New Mexico border. It was great pay, since it was an emergency call out, so I agree. I met up with my crewmen and head down from the Colorado Springs area. We get there at around 9 PM and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for feeling lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged differently. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remembered seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some nearby lights from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light, I hear yelling coming from that area. Now it must have been about 300 yards away, but I hear a woman yelling. She kept saying someone please help over and over again. I crane down and start yelling for the guys. They heard it too and were asking questions. This is really odd. We never see anyone out there. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing. We jump in one of the smaller trucks, since it's a 4x4, and head down the road. We look everywhere for the light, but don't see a thing. We drove back and forth, and then back again and slowed down. We rolled down the windows and stopped the truck in the area where the light should be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our trucks, so to the north. It sounded like two people are having heart attacks, and I mean really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now. Given the general area we're at, they told us to check to see if we feel safe. Because I have the war veteran attitude, I decided to look. Two guys came down with me, and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently, they had a station not too far, like 15 minutes or so away. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes like 1 inches. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it got really dark now. The moaning's still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees into a small clearing. It looks empty. The moaning stopped. We checked around and hear nothing. We went back to the truck, and as soon as we got there, we heard the woman yelling again, yelling the same thing. Someone please help. It was just to the north of where we were. One of the guys yelled back saying, "Where are you?" and gets no reply. Then we hear her scream in pain, and nothing else. We're already running back north and call the police, but they've showed up. They must have seen us running north because two of them came after us. We stopped in the field area and they stopped with us and asked what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and saw nothing. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out for us and check if anything else happened, so we get working again. The police are now parked next to each other, talking while we worked. When I craned up, I can't see any campfire lights or anything. We did the job. Took about an hour and a half until we're done. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left and the other comes with us. He told us that just to the west, there was a small plane that crashed and people burned to death. He said the police and paramedics got to the scene and the fire's still going. He told us about how two bodies were found away from the plane, crawling away from it, and one of the bodies is still there somewhere buried from the 70s or 80s. Yeah, we packed up fast and got the hell out of there. Now I never saw a fire, just light on the trees. Now I can't tell you how creepy that stuff is to find out afterwards. And the voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in the afterlife after this, but God, did it mess my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too. But didn't hear anything about reports of a fire or anything else in the area afterwards. Back when I was a Boy Scout, I took a weekend-long training course called National Youth Leadership Training. One of the last parts of the course was an overnight hike into the woods, with no guide, to find our designated campsite and see how we would work under stress. We finally got to our campsite and began to unpack. We each bought a tent, but half of us left ours behind to lighten the load and buddied up. Lo and behold, my buddy brought a one-man tent only. Either I slept outside or things are going to be really cramped and I didn't want that. The sky was clear and I slept under the stars. The next morning, 4 of the other guys claimed that they saw a coyote walk up to me, sniff my face, stare at me, and leave. They were too scared to go and make it leave. They stuck to their guns though, but I didn't believe them. 4 years later, I was working at the camp as a staff member, and I'm speaking to a senior there, and apparently he said coyotes are pretty common there, and they often boldly show up. It made me realise what the guys were saying wasn't a lie. I just can't believe they let me sleep with a coyote literally at my face. God knows what would have happened if I woken up. I went camping with some friends near Lochmond in Scotland. We set up camp about 3 miles into the woods near a small river and got the fire going to cook some food we brought with us. The site is very remote, but in the evening a couple of guys hiked through and stopped to chat with us. They're from Poland and seem friendly enough, but ask a lot of questions about our group, how many we were, etc. And I'm a bit suspicious, but I put it down to being from different cultures. It's around 10 PM. I start to feel very ill, and I'm thinking, is it possibly from food poisoning? Now, I'm very confused about this because I'm sure the food was cooked correctly. My friends are all pretty drunk, and I had drunk about 4 or 5 cans of Budweiser. Stupidly, I packed my bag after throwing up hard for 15 minutes and decided to hike back to the main road, watching light fading in the distance. I'm about a mile into the hike back. At this point, I've been sick twice and am completely sobered up by throwing up so much. I've got sports bottles full of water. I now stop to rinse my mouth out. At this point, it's near pitch black, so I got into my bag to get out my torch, small knife and my .22 air gun. As I start zipping my bag back up, I hear twig snap nearby and assume it's a rabbit or fox. I shine my torch, but there's nothing. This doesn't make sense because surely I'm at least going to see reflective eyes, but oh well. 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like running, maybe 100 yards behind me, and lots of twigs snapping. I turn around and assume it's my friend, and I say, "Are you kidding me?" I said I knew someone's there, and I'm not joking. I see movement through the trees probably 80 feet away. Whatever this is big. I mean 6 or 7 feet tall and completely black. At this point, my sickness is gone, and my heart's beating through my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I get this feeling that I can only describe as feeling almost dizzy at the surreal position that I found myself in. I take off my rucksack and hang it up. I kill my torch. I still think it's my friends, but I have this horrible feeling. It was too big. I've got my knife though in my jacket pocket, and my pistol gripped harder than I can possibly ever do normally. I walk in the darkness for about 100 yards and stop dead behind a tree and wait. I'm trying my hardest to control my breathing, but it's supremely difficult now. Sure enough, I hear movement again. Very difficult to pinpoint, but it's getting closer. Now I'm caught in two minds, to continue to hide or confront. I decide the latter, and now I burst out from the brush. I'm in two minds, but I have to run now. I point my torch in the general direction of the sound, and there's branches moving. I start moving away from the area like an SAS trooper. I hear distance movement again. Lots of twigs breaking now, from heavy footprints. I don't see anyone now, but I know I'll shoot them. Silence now. I wait a few minutes and head back for my backpack. It's not hanging over the branch anymore. It's on the ground. That's the scariest part for me. Whatever I've been chasing could have never beaten me back to my bag. So something or someone else moved it. The branch is intact, which doesn't make sense either. At this point, I tabble out onto the main road pretty sharp with no incident. I call my fiancée, who quickly picks me up, and I'm violently sick. I believe it's from fear. I tell her about what happened and she's freaking out. To this day, I still don't know exactly what happened. I do know I was terrified and I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I've had a truly weird encounter before. I lived in Southern California at the time, up in the San Gabriel Mountains, a couple of hours east of LA. I know when people think of Cali, they all seem to think of the beaches, but I assure you, the land here is very diverse. My hometown is super tiny and has a fairly popular ski resort on the western side of town. If you take the only highway out past the ski resort for several miles, there's literally nothing but forest. And a very old gold mine is actually still there, and it's kind of cool. After those things, there's nothing but national forest. and then one insanely isolated, very old restaurant that still functions, and then back to the forest for a long time. Anyway, just setting the scene. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened. It's almost Christmas. It snowed heavily, and the snow's still falling on the evening of this happening. My stepdad decided that we would cut down our own Christmas tree this year, so we get into my mum's big Dodge truck and headed off to the mine, which is a couple of miles past the ski resort. We got to the base of the road and were talking and laughing, etc. My stepdad was driving pretty slow since it was snowing decently. They had ploughed part of this road recently too, and there were big snow berms on either side of us, down near up to the top of the truck, probably 8 feet off the ground. So it's just barely getting dark now. Not quite dark, but twilight, I guess. So not dark enough that we can't see anything, but dark enough that the headlights of the truck are on. Quite suddenly, from over on my side, there comes a huge dark shape that arches over the top of the snow berm. It lands in the middle of the road fairly gracefully almost. My stepdad slams on the brakes. I am too stunned to speak or even scream, because there crouching in the middle of the road is some creature. It has a long muzzle and pointy ears, covered in fur. Now, I have really never seen anything like it. This all happens in seconds. The thing jumps down and crouches, glancing at us. My stepdad slams on the brakes, and then it just vaulted up and over the beam and disappeared. It must have been 6 or 7 feet tall. I've never seen anything quite like it. My stepdad refused to talk about it when I asked, terrified. If he had seen the same thing too, I knew he did because how quick he braked, and he was wide-eyed and white for the rest of the journey. I never did bring it up again because we hadn't had the best relationship since then, but sometimes I wish I could know what actually happened then. It still shakes me to my very core, even to this day. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and tons of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. Or there are some of out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places. A lot of the people from where I am are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I do a lot of work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of them small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there for too long. No opportunities or chances for the people that fairly deserve it. And nothing for miles around, like honestly, you're trapped there. I hated it. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service for miles or houses. In the past, there's been a lot of vehicle break-ins on the trailheads. I mean, literally, the gravel there is littered with bits of broken glass from what I can only assume is break-ins. Sometimes, there's really shifty people hanging around those trailheads or just driving around out on the forest roads. There are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars barreling along them, the cement for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 friends of mine and I decided to play paintball in the National Forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip, so we can play the next morning also. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the most popular camping spots. Sadly, a church group or something had taken off all the spots. This really got us annoyed. This was really the only camping spot that we're familiar with, and it's getting late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further into the woods. By now, it's getting dark, and we're getting worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but no service of course. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That being said, it looked like a 4x4 had been going over the mound, so it's worn now. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over it. Now, there was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove for a few miles down the road, coming across an opening next to a creek. There were some blue traps hanging over a plywood nailed to a tree. That's odd. That said, it was pretty much dark now, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up in the tent. After we set up, I start noticing there's a lot of trash in the woods. I see a green bottle on the ground. I took a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of some home and garden insecticide. I was really tired now and thought someone was dumping some garbage here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage here when we're more than an hour away from the nearest home. We set up camp, have some beers and made chili from scratch. By this time, it's probably 11 PM and we're eating. We noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles don't make sense. It seemed like it was far too bright and wasn't moving. It's a kind of glow you see over a big bright city, and we don't see the light source itself. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it's not campers. The hill was about a quarter of a mile from our campsite, and we investigate. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have done it. However, we had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and 2 of us decide to look. My other friend decides to stay. He's gonna do some popcorn on the fire. So we start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. It could have been beavers, but why would they go all the way around a tree in a perfect circle? We start talking about the ghosts in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top, my friend falls and yells out. A few seconds later, the light goes out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what it is after all. Walking back in silence and keep on looking back every few seconds, we decide to turn off our flashlights and return to the campsite with the moonlight guiding us. We get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around. He's wearing a hooded coat that I've never seen him wear before. For some reason, he has a paintball gun. That seems odd. We look at each other. The fire's dying down. We don't see the campsite well. Now, we've been gone for an hour. From the distance, it appears as though my friend is looking for something. He kept walking around the site and peering in. When we're almost back to the campsite, we see our friend walk up the road we came from. We figure he's went to the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to our fire waiting for him to return. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent and vomits. After we left, he had a few more drinks apparently. We ask him why he's wandering around with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange face and says, "They're locked in the cab of the truck." "Did you unlock it?" "No." We go to the truck and enter the door code and see our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck are hidden underneath a magnetic fob. I get a sinking feeling. What were you doing after we left? I watched a movie then fell asleep. But wait, you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? He said he'd been in the tent the whole time, wearing the same unhooded fleece. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't him. At this point, of course, we're all too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent, we just fold it with the sleeping bags and think, heck, jumping in the F-150. When we get up to the dirt hump, we see something grey blocking our path. The metal barrier that's been laying in the woods is now erect. By this point, we've all sobered up. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of my truck, so I slowly tap it. It falls over, and we drive very slowly over it, terrified we're going to pop one of the tyres and be stranded. It didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it on the moonlight. I now begin to drive as quick as I possibly can. The vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It just stays 1 or 2 turns behind us, but always follows. After 45 minutes of speeding, we get back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my home and decide to go a different way. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. Rural camping can be very dangerous, and we've never went back there since. Okay, so I have no idea exactly what I saw that night. I have searched everywhere for sightings, or even myths around that area we saw it, and found nothing. If anyone has any idea what we saw, please let me know. My husband and I think it could have well been a Wendigo, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone else say they've seen anything like it. I guess more than anything I want to know what I saw and have some closure. So anyway, my friends and I go camping a lot, and my favourite place is the Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We go there often. I've been going there since I was an infant. I'm 28 now, married with a kid and still go. It's the coolest place to go where I live, and you can actually see the Milky Way pretty much every night. I mean, it's perfect for stargazing, and I've seen a shooting star every clear night that I've been there. When we go there without our kid, We might have a hike and stargaze for hours. Our first experience happened when we were night hiking, and we would go on trails we knew well, and we used frequently during the day. Ones with log fences and gazebo resting places. The most used trail is in the National Bridge State Park that leads up to the Natural Bridge. The trail is around 2 miles uphill depending on where you're starting. Now I've done this trail every summer of my life and could do it blindfolded. It has wooden steps, carved rock steps, log handrails, multiple sitting points under a roof, trash cans, but after reaching the main trailhead there's no lights at all. It's used often, and while it's uphill and the difficulty is low, as long as you have a good grip on your shoes and water, you'll be fine. My friends have done it with me multiple times and we're confident as hell at it. Hiking this trail at night is not allowed, but the woods have never really been a problem for me, and no one really cared about the closure times. When we used this main trail to hike to the top, we would park in a lot designated for the pool and Hoedown Island. You walk across the road that leads to the pool, and you're at the first trail marker. You go up the gravel for a while and past the Natural Bridge State Park Lodge. There's a waterfall and some lights, so it was best to go fast and watch out for rangers that would tell us to leave. Then walk across another road and there's a mini shelter to sit on or a small rock where you can rest your legs. Then it's the beginning of the top of the trail. The night was weird to begin with. As soon as we started the hike, the clouds took over and it appeared we'd be walking for nothing even to stargaze at. But we went anyway, just in case it cleared out by the time we get there. In the beginning, it was normal, and paranoia was kinda setting in, but eased up a little. You know you've reached the bottom of the bridge when you see a giant limestone wall. Now during this time, there was a gazebo that sat to the right of this wall, and the trail continued and followed next to the wall. When you come far, there's a fairly steep part of the trail and the gazebo is welcomed. Now my husband, my best friend at the time, and I all sit on the gazebo steps. The bench is under a roof and even darker than the rest of the outside, so we just stayed on the steps, facing to where we're looking downhill at the trail that follows the limestone wall. We each have a bright LED headlamp and a handheld flashlight. We don't usually look at each other when we night hike because the lights are so bright. We sit in a line like the Lord's Supper and walk in a line staggered so we don't blind each other. It's after hours at this point, so no ski lift rides had gone on for hours and the rangers had already done the sweep and left before we could get there. We left no time between them making sure the trail and the top were clear and start our hike. The ski lifts takes you to the top, but there are workers that stay and do counts and only leave after it's clear. I guess I have to make these points because that's what I was thinking when what seemed out of nowhere, a girl with a headlamp begins to walk down the trail. This is kind of odd really. She's in a sundress and flip-flops. This hike is uphill, and while it's fairly easy to hike up, it's not easy to do without real shoes or water. She'd have to have hiked up and down to get to this point without food or water, which is a massive challenge. Her light seemed almost blinding too. When she reached where the trail turns from in front of the gazebo to down where we came from, she stopped. She just stood there, how a human is presented in an anatomical drawing. She was looking directly at us all, sitting there, and her light made me bring my head up. It was so bright that I literally had to shield my eyes. She didn't turn away from our light at all, or even seem bothered. She had 6 LEDs shining directly at her face. I say hello. She said, kind of with a pause between every word, something like, hello, how, are you?" I said something like, "Good. How are you?" And she took an even longer pause before saying, "Oh, I'm fine." And she just stood there with her hands to her side, facing down, staring at us. Her light made it impossible to really see her face. It was unnaturally bright. I had my hand up the entire time to not be blinded still, until she turned and slowly walked down the trail part we just came up. She got to the part where the trail turned, and we saw her light just stay in that one spot for a minute, until she turned and the light faded out of sight. We wait for a while before continuing up. I kept making comments about how weird that was, and had anybody else just seen this? And was I being overly paranoid with my fear? And why did no one come after her? Why had she done this all alone at night? And somehow without being found by any ranger. We got up after a bit and started back up to the top. It felt like it took much longer than it ever had in the past, but we made it to the top. There's stone steps named Fat Man Squeeze that you get to at the top of the bridge, and you can walk across it and whatever. Going up and being on the top, we can hear twigs snapping, almost alternating from left to right. We lay down and stargaze, but the clouds are thicker now. It was miserably hot, and we can hear voices at the same time. My husband kept checking for people. He never saw anyone. We see a flashlight, but we never see anyone attached to it. And then we hear a bird call. It wasn't like a real bird noise at all. It was like someone making bird calls, rhythmic and not natural. I'm convinced now that we're not alone, and hadn't been alone at all during this. And to say this is a lot because I'm not easily spooked. I asked to leave as soon as they're done. They then tell me that they're ready to go right then and there, and that scared me. It showed that I wasn't imagining all of this and they're just as scared as I am. We began going down the way we came from, and it felt like it was taking so long. We were going steady and quick, and it was downhill, but we were not making any ground, it seems. It's hard to explain, but it was so weird to the point that I said aloud, "This feels much longer than it should be," and everyone agrees with me. I keep looking behind me with the flashlight, and my husband kept looking out to the sides. I kept feeling watched and couldn't figure out where the footsteps were coming from. It sounded as though they're coming from all directions. I would turn my head in the direction of a sound and not see anything. When my husband was walking, he kept saying he was catching eyes in the flashlight. Usually you catch a raccoon's eyes spying on you, but he was afraid maybe it's a bigger animal like a bear or something. And even weirder is that he never seemed to catch contact with it truly when his flashlight went over it. By now, we're hiking down a semi-flattish area, compared to the downhill hike we've been doing at least. The log fence or handrail or whatever it's called is on our right side. Now, we're walking in a row within reaching distance of this barrier, and my husband just stops walking altogether and says, "What's that?" But the question is more of an alert than a question. I move my headlamp in that direction and don't see anything at first. Then, both of his lights catch a shape, and then my headlamp also does the same. I move my headlamp to the center and catch it while my friend simultaneously finds it in her lights as well. All six shine on a kind of reflective grey creature. It's bent in a crouching position, kneeling on its front leg, and it starts turning towards us. It starts to turn slowly, and my mind is racing. It looks like a human, but it's too big. People mistake human shapes for what's actually bears, but this is skinny, It's thin and big, and almost white. It's so light grey. Its skin resembles that of a dolphin. There's a shine to it, and our lights get reflected a little way when they're on it. It gradually comes to a standing position in front of us. Its head is long, and its eyes are in a human position on its face, not on the side like most animals. We can't see other facial features, just big, almost empty holes or pits where its eyes are. It looks directly at us and our lights. The way it stood is almost intimidating, almost like when a snake raises up and flexes their necks in a wild fashion to show how strong and smart they are. It was like it was stepping up for a fight, from crouching, then standing directly in front of us. The arms hung down so low, the hands seemed way too long. Its hands had to be by its knees easily. I guess it stood 9 feet or so, and not that far in front of us. No, it has no hair at all, and its head is large. I couldn't process what I was seeing. I was truly frozen. Then, I just feel my husband hitting me, yelling run. I start to understand we have to get away from this thing, and it pivots and runs to the right, going backwards on the trail so it could get around the barrier and onto the trail behind us. We take off running the rest of the way down the trail, knowing that this thing just took off much faster than us, and after it had crossed from behind the barrier, it would be gaining on us quick. We didn't talk at all because we tried to figure out what was going on and knew it wasn't good to draw attention to us. We kept running as fast as we could, but some areas are steep. It literally never feels as though we're out of sight from this creature. And we made it to the trail beginning with the gravel, and we can hear something to the side crashing down through the forest. We ran until we got to the car, then drove as fast as we could, and as soon as we got to the main road, we're finally out of there. When that thing looked at us, I knew it was smarter and faster than us. I knew that if we didn't react, something terrible would have happened. We made it back to where we're all staying, and all of us took out our phones and wrote a note of what we saw. We haven't spoke about it until after, and we all looked at each other's phones and the stories are all exactly the same. When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in those woods where we're on the edge of our neighbourhood. We would always play at around 6, but had to be home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those are the only rules our parents had for us. Well, one Friday, we're out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go in the woods deeper. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but I do remember coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep into the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I start to head back, I turn my head to look at the same shack one last time, and for a split second, I see someone peeking around the door. Whoever it was quickly turns their head back when they saw me, and I don't pay much attention to it and head back. I'm about halfway through my walk when I hear, "Hey kid, come over here." I look back and see an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing for me to come. I know better, and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait now, come back," and I could also hear the sounds of other footsteps accompanying him after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friend's house, who was wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually, I told my mum what happened too. Our parents called the police to search for the woods, but they never found anything. and our parents never let us play out again after that. Old man living in the shack, you could still be out there. I just hope you get caught and haven't done anything worse. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 80s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer, they'd been out for a few days in the Pikes National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night, my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark, and outside stood a pair of bare pale feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and said, "What's wrong?" My dad said someone was barefoot out there, and they went out and flashed their flashlights for a bit, hollering. My dad swore that he saw the feet and described them in perfect detail. They were old blotchy feet, even having a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked what foot, left or right, and my dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. My dad says why. Tony says he doesn't have time to explain. They all go along with it and pack up and move up to the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine that night. It would have surely killed them. Tony's grandfather had just died a month prior, and one of the last things he said to him was that he would always watch over him. The feet described reminded Tony of his grandfather's very feet. My dad is highly religious too. Supernatural or not, it's terrifying what happened to them. So this happened to me when I was about 7, and I lived in Portland with my grandparents. Now my grandma and I would always watch Lost together every night, and then the news would always come on afterwards. When we saw there was a sniper that was going around our area, in the woods somewhere, and they were looking for him, and lost his location, it blew our minds. I remembered one day at school, the whole school had to go on lockdown, because someone reported seeing him near the school, and so everyone had to go to the hall and wait out the entire situation to clear. I don't think we left school until 7 PM. The police caught him and took him in for questioning. Later on, we found out through the news that he was hiding out in these small woods that are behind our house, literally meters away. Now my grandma and I would go for bike rides and walks most evenings. The only reason we hadn't was because of the shooter. I refused to leave the house for a good week or so because I was scared that he'd still be out there, and I wouldn't let my grandparents leave either because I was so scared something bad would happen to them. To this day, I still have a mini panic attack every time I go near them woods. Just the thought that at some point in time, only meters away, there was a killer waiting in the woods in camouflage terrifies me. It was the end of my freshman year of college, so my friend and I spent a weekend at my family's cabin by ourselves to celebrate. The weekend was fairly uneventful. The most exciting things to happen were burning a pizza on a grill, and a chipmunk trying to join me while I was in the outhouse, which was pretty funny. But then, we had to leave. Even though I'd gone to the cabin every summer since I was born, I still didn't know very well how to get from it. We had been using my friend's dad's GPS. It was pretty old and probably hadn't been updated in a while, which is likely why it took us where it did. The route we took was fairly unfamiliar to me, but what do I know? It's a GPS. I trusted it enough to bring us wherever we needed to go. It ended up taking us down a twisted side road that I knew was wrong, but I kept going, thinking that maybe going through the woods would be faster. That's when it told me to take a left. I obeyed, but was extremely confused because it looks to be a dirt road. I slow down to look at the GPS when my friend lets out a horrid, "Oh my god." I look up and realise we're not on the road at all. We're on someone's driveway. Then I saw the dolls. They were worn by the weather, full of dirt and faded from the sun. The ones I took note of were clowns, and bodiless and beheaded. There were so many, I can't even make out how many there actually are. Every single one's hanging from a tree. My friend and I were both shrieking at this point. Her yelling at me to back up and get out of there, me yelling what the hell over and over again. We safely got back to the main road and followed that until the GPS gave us a different route, which took us home without incident. Although I didn't see the person living in that rundown house, it was one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me. It didn't even feel real when it was happening. It felt like I'd been dropped into the middle of a horror movie about a serial killer with some doll fetish or something. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if the person who lived there actually saw me pulling up. But I try not to let my imagination get the best of me. I hate to think of whoever's responsible for that house, if they still lived there. Okay, for some quick background, I'm of Mexican descent, and in our culture, the dead and spirits are a big part of our culture as seen by Día de los Muertos. I butchered that. Now as a kid, my family would always share ghost stories from the old country in Mexico. I would like to share a few if you're willing to listen. This one is from my grandma. She states that when she was a little girl, she saw the devil or some kind of creature imitating it. Back in the 1940s, many families were poor, and I mean really poor. She lived in a poor village in Guerrero, and to go to the bathroom, you literally had to take a trip to the forest, even at night in pitch black darkness, with only the stars and moonlight to guide you. She was there peeing when she walked back home, and she suddenly heard what sounded like a parade of horses coming her way. Of course, that was not possible as it was complete darkness. No one travelled the roads at the time. She saw a figure on top of a single horse, and she said he didn't look up, just told her something and kept going before disappearing quickly after. When she arrived home, her mother saw her hair standing up on end. Now this meant that there was some kind of evil presence in her village. And now another story. She encountered the famous weeping woman, La Lorena, in a similar situation while out in the woods at night. She said a woman who was half white and half shadow was walking down a dirt road while crying, giving out lament sounds. She couldn't see her face and she didn't seem to have any legs. Now this is my mother and father. In Mexico and other places in Latin America, there are many accounts of gnomes and evil nature spirits such as shapeshifters, forest imps, and fairies. My mother told me the story of her sister who had a baby daughter one night. My aunt was sleeping. They lived in a village near forest, and apparently she saw a little child walk around making noises. She had a young son, but he was sleeping in his room. This girl was a newborn child, and shouldn't be able to walk yet. She had no idea whose child this was. She called the child thinking it was her son, and it ran towards her room and under her bed. When she looked down getting ready to scold this child, which she thought was her son playing in the late hours of night, there was nothing there. In Mexico, it is believed that gnomes can kill and take the souls of children. This almost happened to my father. He was getting ready at my grandmother's house playing in the yard as a kid. Apparently they were going out later, but she had many trees, when suddenly he saw a bunch of children on the treetop calling his name, gesturing him to come up. His grandma said that he could play with kids, but of course, she saw nothing up there and held him inside because she knew what it was. She said some prayer completely freaking my dad out and said he's not allowed to go outside again. In another instance, though, unfortunately, he was playing with his baby cousin sitting in a baby chair when suddenly his cousin just dropped her head like that and went to sleep and passed away. My dad called over his aunt, and when examining her, they found marks on her neck, as though she's attacked by an unseen force. My mother said that her father and a neighbour were enemies, but there was something about this neighbour that scared the locals. There were many rumours and claims that he was a Nahual, but this is so. Apparently when the house was sold, they found hidden within a book of spells, witchcraft and Satanism, and other horrible stuff. Finally, the last story to tell, it involves ghosts from the Mexican Revolution. My mother was a young girl. This is basically a repeat of my grandmother's story, where she went out to use the bathroom at night, and when she looked up, she saw a man dressed in Revolutionary era clothing sitting on a rock. No one was out at those times. He had an old Mexican Revolution type sombrero, and just looked in my mum's direction but had no face, just a silhouette. She got up as fast as she could and ran back inside. It is said in her village that a Mexican Revolutionary guerrero soldier was executed in that spot, hanging from a tree. This was common in the time, as most revolutionaries were either hung or had a firing squad execute them. I've had very weird experiences before. Now, I'm not from Sierra Nevada, but far north of that. I spend the majority of my free time in the summer hiking, camping and fishing. I'm familiar with the area, the wildlife and ecosystem in general. I haven't posted anything like this just because I've never had the reasons to, but I had a weird feeling once and a strange reaction with my dog. Now, the dog's a very experienced dog who's quite large. He's a male and about 130 pounds. Nothing scares him. I've literally seen him square off with a mountain lion and not react. Now, it was on the smaller side, but still a juvenile male. With a couple of good growls and posturing on my dog's side, it sent the cat running. Now, I had another in the same area, would hear it crying. It seems to have come from the tree line at about dusk, and the dog quickly scared it off in the same fashion. So it does not get spooked, is what I'm saying. But there's been a couple of times where he and I are out hiking, and the woods suddenly go dead silent. Normally I'm assuming it's a predator or something, or maybe people. But those couple of odd times where he's completely fearless normally and happy, he suddenly whimpers and cowers next to me, standing on edge, clearly terrified. I should mention that a dog that size leaning on me can make me sort of want to fall over. He's nearly sent me down the side of a mountain before. Now, when this happened once, I heard a strange clicking sound that I couldn't explain. It's almost like it sent shudders through my body. But I'm not talking about a fear, like actual shudders, like when a sound's so loud that it passes through you. The one time this happened, I literally sprinted for my life. And it was almost like the second I passed a certain tree, the sound immediately continued like nothing had changed. That's the part that scares me the most. How can the sound turn off then on again so suddenly? I wouldn't have been so terrified if my dog wasn't so afraid. but that's what freaks me out. It was our second year in our new home in the suburbs, specifically in the Philippines, Cagayan de Oro City. I was 8 years old at the time when I first discovered that things I thought could just exist in stories were actually true, and I experienced it. It was a Sunday afternoon, and when we are told to get our butts moving because we're going to go to the mall, I'm really excited and happy that after a long weekend, I got to spend a day at the mall playing at the arcade, so normally I would get excited and active. I took a shower and was so loud and noisy that little did I know, things were about to go wrong. I was asking my babysitter if she saw where my shirt had gone, and she pointed to the left side. And when I tried to look towards where my shirt was, my head slightly tilted to the right. Now, it didn't bother me at first. I tried to move my head straight, but as to my inconvenience, a very sharp pain took to my neck, and slowly I couldn't do anything but tilt my head to the right. I shout to everyone in the house for help, and the babysitter rushes over to me. At first I thought she's going to take this as a joke, but she realizes I'm in pain. So what we did was went to my grandmother's sister to check on me, and she replied that it's him ma duyan, and was annoyed by my antics and that I was being too noisy, so slapping me was enough to make me realize my rudeness. A small dwarf-like creature in the Filipino folklore, from what I remembered, there were two types of them, the one that is mostly good, and evil being the other, and to my stupid luck, I annoyed the bad one. After we visited my grandmother's sister, we eventually went to the mall and ate at KFC. I specifically remembered what I ate, and it was spaghetti. After that, we went home. A few days later, I could tilt my head a little bit more to the other side and look like a normal person. My mum heard what was happening to me and told my babysitter to offer a black native chicken as a peace offering. Then a day later, things go back to normal. After the encounter, we let our house be blessed by a magamat, which is a witch doctor that specialized on dealing with things instead of hurting them. And nothing bad or paranormal happened since then. For my entire childhood, my father and I used to take late night walks due to his insomnia from shift work. Our neighbourhood is considered to be very safe, and ultimately was an urban neighbourhood besides one of the roads towards the back of the neighbourhood being lined with a thick forest for about 1.25 miles deep, which made a circle back on itself. All of these walks are very dear memories of mine, except for one, and it ended being the last one. Along the road with the tree line, there was a slight tree light to illuminate a small plot of land that somebody owned but was very overgrown and ill-kept. It was very common for us to walk this road to enjoy the sounds of the forest, the lack of illumination, and the ease of circling back. One ordinary night as we are walking and making conversation, my father abruptly stops, pulls me closer, puts a hand over my mouth, crouches with me, and points towards a single illuminated plot roughly 100 yards away. At first, I don't see anything. I think he's pulling my leg, but as I began to look into the forest, I see a very small humanoid figure, roughly 3 feet in height, scrawny with long limbs. It almost materialized out of the bush line and cautiously takes in its surroundings before signaling towards the bush. After a few seconds, 2 other small humanoid figures materialize as well. After a brief moment of what looked to be a discussion, all 3 make a dash for the tree line. Once this happened, my father picked me up, threw me on his shoulder, and we make a break for home, which is about half a mile away. Now my dad is 6'5", 220 pounds, but I'm only 120. He literally never showed a sign of slowing down. That's how scared he was. And after that night, we never took late night walks again. Instead, installed 4 bright motion detection lights on our porch. The few times I brought it up, he says he doesn't want to talk about it. Those figures still give me chills, and the image of those 3 huddling together is very vivid 15 years on. I didn't see anything, but I've had a few weird experiences out in the woods. I live near the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains. I hike up there pretty much from May to October. A few years ago, I decided to hike this pretty strenuous trail that leads to a huge rock slide. I park and notice that I'm the only person there. I have 2 dogs, get them out and start to go up the trail. About a mile in, I come to this clearing that has a huge teepee-like structure in it. The trees are woven together. I put down my walking stick and start taking pictures. There's a weird tall sapling that seems to be bent almost backwards that's woven in. I move up the trail after the pictures, and as soon as I walk past the tree structure, I immediately felt like I'm being watched, and the woods went silent. It was so weird. No bugs, no birds, no small animal sounds, dead silent. I hike by myself all the time and don't get scared or creeped out easily. I've seen bears and I'm pretty sure there's cougars up there. I keep going up and the feeling's getting worse now, being way more intense, and my dogs are acting weird. These are experienced trail dogs that don't really get weird like that. They always stay super close to me, not making a lot of noise. I realise that I've left my walking stick down by a tree structure. Oh well. I don't want to go back down there to get it. I got a quarter of a mile or so past the tree line now, and the feeling of being watched is unbearable. I'm thinking, okay, rationally, it's probably a big cat, so I head back down. The rational part of my brain is slowing down now. My fight response? Nah. I go full speed down at a 30 or 40 degree slope. I get down the tree structure and meadow and I look down where my walking stick is. It's gone. Like it's nowhere to be seen. It was pretty distinct too because it's made of aspen. I picked it up somewhere else and there's no aspen in this forest. I'm terrified. I kept running. I felt like it's being chased, but I never saw anything. Never heard anything either. Yeah, it could have been a big cat, but why did it only start after I passed the tree structure? And how did my stick go missing? I was nearly to the parking lot before the feeling of being watched finally left me. And I will never go back up there, not even in a group. I still get chills when I think about this. When I was about 7 or 8, every morning when I would wake up, I would go into my grandma's room and lay in bed with her until she got up. One morning, I'd go in, get some blankets and lay down with her, when I look over to the dresser, and in front of the closet, I kid you not, there's 2 6 to 8 inch men. I just stared at them and froze because I was terrified. I finally closed my eyes hard and hoped they would go away. After a couple of seconds, I opened them up and they're gone. I always wondered if what I saw in my mind was real, but I can picture it so vividly. Even what they were wearing. One had a red shirt, one had an orange shirt, And to this day, I'm now terrified of gnomes. Like I get sweaty palms and like flashbacks, almost like I have PTSD. I know this is going to be way out there, but I have to get it off my chest and see if anyone has any theories. So my mum and I used to go on annual road trips, which included stopping for any points of interest along the highway, abandoned buildings, beautiful lookouts, tourist spots, etc. I remember one year when I was about 9, where we spent 11 hours straight on the road. At the time, my mum was beginning to documenting everything on her camera, so she decided to bring it along and got some awesome shots of the mountains. One of the neat things we found was a sort of rest stop and hiking area. We followed a path for maybe 20 meters when we come up to an old brick building. It was starting to crumble, and there was moss and mold covering its exterior. We were never sure what the building used to be, but we figured it must have been a random historic landmark if they kept it where it was, instead of actually demolishing it. We just thought it was really weird. We took a look inside and realised that whatever it used to contain was long gone, as the entire interior showed obvious signs of a bad fire. Everything was covered in soot. All that was left was an old fireplace and some scattered tiles. The main room had 2 brick support pillars, which hundreds of people had scratched their names into. I found a small chunk of rebar and carved ours into one of them as well. Afterwards, we left and carried on with our journey. That's where my memory of the day ends. Now recently, my nana gave me a couple of old boxes of my mum's stuff to go through. She ended up passing away when I was 16. One of the boxes had a couple dozen VHS movies, things like Escape from LA, Ren and Stimpy, The Goonies, all that good stuff. There were several unsealed tapes though, that were not labelled, which I immediately recognised as some of my mum's old home movies. I was thrilled, as now I can see my mum again in her glory days. It's extremely meaningful. After finding a VHS player at a pawn shop, because who still owns one in 2019, I started popping the tapes in to see what's on them. School recites, parties, typical stuff. The third one though, that's from 14 years ago. I got to the part where we had explored the hiking trails and got completely lost in the nostalgia. Except the video didn't match my memory of that day. Firstly, the path we took off the road was significantly longer than I remembered. It wasn't a mere 20-ish meters, but closer to a kilometer. Once inside, we looked around and found the pillars, and I wrote her names just as I remembered. Her name ended in an I, so I'm confused. I just kind of stabbed the pillar with the rebar, which makes a loud echoing sound. The second I did that in the video, I can hear my mum gasp and says, "What was that?" in a terrified voice. She started getting increasingly uneasy as I kept staring into the dark room while whining and saying I didn't feel good. Eventually, in a very shaky tone, she says we have to leave. Her camera kept scanning the room and the forest outside as though she's looking for something. Now the weirdest part, I don't ever remember feeling uneasy that day, but here I was watching both of us on the verge of a panic attack. I told her I was too scared to move and that I wanted to go. She helps me get up and we start back to the door when the camera sharply spun back to the room and focused on a whole lot of nothing. She starts mumbling, no, I really don't like this," and made her way back outside. When she came out, I was nowhere to be seen. She yelled my name a couple of times and ran around to the back of the building, and she rounded it and came back out to the front. I was standing there smiling, since I was on the verge of tears and hyperventilating. She says, "Am I okay?" and I say, "Why?" The last minute of the video shows us walking back to the road and her occasionally looking back at the building. I'm completely weirded out now. I legitimately do not remember any of this happening. The memory is exactly as I described it. I have no clue what to make of it. It deeply unsettles me. Why don't I remember the meltdown? Why were we so afraid of this place? Where did I disappear to? Why did I come back fine but crying? What was my mum saying? What did my mum sense in there? That's the part that kills me. The part I'll never get an answer to.
Over the years I've been on Reddit, I've shared a handful of stories to the sub. This is one that I've been saving for whatever reason, and I think I'm ready to share. This is probably my last post on Let's Not Meet, since it's not very often that something happens that's worthy of a Let's Not Meet post. I've shared a few of my experiences, and I think I saved the best for last. Everything mentioned here is 100% factual. Long read, but I believe it's worth it. I grew up in the south, tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice, but along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out, like a club or a cool bar, and the places that were close to this were pretty boring. I'm sure if you've lived in an actual rural area, you understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music, and would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and also just getting the right amount of spooky in that too. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than what I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact that it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable chill night. So if I was to take a guess, it would probably be around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry free. I had my music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down and park out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but is actually a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean some sort of dirt road that goes through the woods or anything like that. It's like a normal paved road, but there's really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to spread out further and further, to almost becoming no houses and just a road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I liked this drive at night was because of how creepy it was, and it looked like it was some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything, it's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods, so obviously around 3 AM in the morning it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal little loop around the drive of the park. The night before it stormed very badly, so badly that I remember my parents had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty bad. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that loops around the exit of the park that must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car obviously. It was pitch black everywhere, besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous and there was no way. At this spot of the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured it would make most sense to go back up in the grass besides me just a little, and then take a drive the way back I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My tyres were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty annoyed at me, but said they'd pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in the situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of human civilization, so I realised I would be stuck there for at least an hour before someone would be able to get me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just tried to listen to music and be on my phone while in the car while I waited. Not really much else I could have done. After I kind of calmed down from the initial danger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything that was going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been about 40 deer in this field, just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in the direction, I would have easily been able to hit one. So if I was to guess, I'd say about 30 yards out. This didn't really help me with the creepy level going on. Looking out of the front of your car and seeing an AEI reflection staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over a lot quicker than I was, because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck is on the way and is going to be about an hour and a half out from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, you've got to be kidding me. I understood that me and only me was the reason I was in the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just to make sure my doors were all locked, lay in my back seat, and take a nap to pass the time. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to that weird feeling of being watched. I'm not sure that anyone else has ever experienced anything like that before, because I don't know how common it is, but there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I needed to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in the surroundings I was in, is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. A pocket knife. I was so scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling was terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided not to mention the feeling that I was having because I didn't want them to worry anymore, and I knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling I had, and had nothing to back it up. No update from the tow truck guy, so I assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes before I felt like such an idiot. They both have to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100+, and on top of that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation but worried. I told them I would make sure to tell them when the guy arrives and that I'm sorry. We hung up and I looked from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were completely perked up, staring in the same direction right in front of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them was stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for something to happen, but nothing happened at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick, and they didn't even budge or look my way. They were still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far in the field. I knew they were looking into the woods, but I wasn't able to see what. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked, every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds the field was empty. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car was the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel utterly like a sitting duck. My head was on swivel, I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an absolute eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see the lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see the tow truck guy. The lights of his truck felt like it was Jesus coming to save me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me, and that something's definitely nearby. He let me know he had a shotgun in the truck, and assured me that it was most likely a bear or a bobcat. He gave me the whole, "they're more scared of you than you are of them." The tree was sort of small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way of his truck, and then he attached my car and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up. The whole time he was doing it, I had my eyes glued in that field waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 50 minutes and told me to follow his truck out onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and my head was on swivel, completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot that I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out from the tree line behind where my car was and walked into the middle of the road and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating, legitimately. I lost my breath, my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in that moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like, or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming right up to my window and watching me sleeping. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he didn't move. Just watched us in the road. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people on the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there, more than anything. The second that we finally got out of the park and was able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver and did nothing below 70 miles per hour the entire way home. I flew through the stop signs and the stop lights. I didn't care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside very quickly and acknowledged my parents, said sorry and thank you, and went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of that night. I was searching for any sort of records or anything happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of squatter or homeless. I read many things online about how it's common for homeless in rural areas to build a shelter in the woods, which does make sense entirely on why they'll do that. But obviously the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he was going to hurt me? Just, what if? There's so many possibilities that could have happened, but the outcome that did happen is the one that I'm most grateful for. I never told my parents the full story until many years after it happened, and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them out too when I told them. I never went back to that park. Even though I no longer live by there, I still have no desire to ever go back there. I don't think I could even go back in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did it a few times after that with people, but even then I felt very uncomfortable and on edge.
It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at her childhood home where her mother now lived all alone. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed lawns, American flags and empty sidewalks, you're picturing this correctly. It's a single-story home with an attached garage out front. The garage has 2 doorways, one that leads to the garden and backyard. This had an old dodgy door from their days with dear old Macs, Brit Macs, that were covered with a piece of nailed in wood. They had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that can happen? The second door leads to the kitchen, hollow core. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in. So we're asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom at the front of the house at 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. You know, you're in the diving bell, and you're submerged hundreds of meters below the surface in black water, protected from the real world by miles of nothing. Then I hear it. You scream, "What are you doing?" And my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway to me. Lost in a sea of sleep, it sounds like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolt up. What happened next happened in a couple of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard it to be awoken with a sense of urgency. It wasn't an "oh, you scared me" type of scream. This is different. And I knew it. Not consciously, but my lizard brain, the piece we retrained from our primitive ancestors, knowing something's wrong. I watched and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream is horrifyingly similar to ones you hear on that. The one that says, "This can't be really happening to me, can it?" Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was about to be murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of person? I always have, and I come to know something about myself, that I'm a fighter. I leapt out of bed and growled, yes growled, "I'm gonna kill you," and took off running. I tore open the bedroom door, running into the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law. She has a full nightgown on. Look of utter shock on her face. Standing still, we make eye contact as I continue towards her. Then she turned her head, looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and around the corner into the kitchen. The hollowed door is obliterated. Shards everywhere. I look through the open frame and see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a car just out of view. Just as I make it to the driveway, I see a car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping, and who am I to say no to adrenaline? Like an idiot, I run barefoot after it. I give a good go, but I'm no Michael Johnson, and he can't even catch a speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street. I'm now stood here on my own. The police show up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, makes me feel a lot more at ease. They take our statements. My mother-in-law said she heard a noise, hollow knocking on the door, and walked into the kitchen where she encountered a burglar, a small-framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze through the dodgy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage for the others. According to the police, they very likely thought that nobody was in. Fortunately, my mother-in-law caught her off guard and screamed. But it feels good to know that everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we've bought the heaviest goddamn door that you'll ever see. I'd like to see a mouse try and get through that. That's funny.
Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads, or the path we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to the headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home till sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was only a piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink due to rainwater, and we wanted to seize the opportunity before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very closed path that leads directly into the densely wooded wilderness. As we came up through the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny, moving ball with a dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, the small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of the hill overlooking where we'd just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout in this hill, hoping that the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4 wheels and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out exactly what they were saying due to the distance we covered. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought is that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one out here the many times we've been there, and honestly we doubt this country even had a budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They yelled up to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there, we can see you, come out!" We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now!" and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they were park rangers. We watched them split up, each going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point where he screamed from. I thought about calling out for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and run somewhere far enough away from these people to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we could through the woods, since their headlights gave away the location on these paths. We would hide again whenever we thought they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered by leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. We finally emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with on our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite ignoring him, and he was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed to get picked up right away. He agreed and sped over to us while Justin and I waited hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted to the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt at being safely driven home and everything I'd just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with the night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would have gone by the time the officers made it out there anyway, and we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard the story. Some think we walked right up into a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started we couldn't see. Our minds both went to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer, so I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly though, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose.
This is the most terrifying moment of my life. and always will be. My family and a family friend's family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian mountain range. We rented cabins at a camping site and arranged for certain paths to take the following day. It would be a 4-day trip. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time and spoke a lot. But on the 4th day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than the rest. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter what I did. And then, everyone else on the hike denies this, but I hear singing in a language that I've never heard before. It's like the singing described in the myth of the sirens, sweet yet enchanting, yet the music invoked a feeling of fear down to my bones. Everyone else seems completely oblivious to it. I'm telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me I was probably tired and that we're going to stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, the singing just gets louder. My heart's racing. We had to stop to rest and eat. I wish with all my heart that we hadn't stopped. About 2 minutes into our little rest, the singing's getting progressively louder. My nerves have not settled. Then, everything goes silent. Everyone in our group, which is about 12 people, suddenly turns to our left. A figure that's very tall in a black coat was barely visible between the trees. It's a woman, much taller than people are supposed to be, with pure white hair flowing out of her hood. Her head is down, but her face is still visible. All I can make out is that her skin's very pale, like old paper. As we watch, she just stalks closer to our group, finally stopping dead at the edge of the tree line. And she looks up, and I swear to God, as long as I live and breathe, I can't forget her face. Her eyes are white. She has a pointed nose and pale lips. She stares at us for a moment and smiles. That's horrifying. She has no teeth. She then begins to try and talk to us in this high-pitched tone, but I don't know what she's saying. And in a blink, she's gone. Everyone's silent. This is my first time telling the experience, and I hate it. I just need to try and get it off my chest.
I was a kid. My parents sent me to Christian camp every year during the summer. Despite the Christian atmosphere, the campgrounds were wrought with ghost stories and rumours, most of them made up. The campgrounds had some history, and the founders of the camp had their own cabin, which was repurposed as a campers cabin. It was more of a shed, but rumour was it was haunted. With side paths and several clearings hidden away in the forest parts, people would sneak away and do unorthodox things. Satanic rituals were rumoured to take place, but probably weren't true. The way the camp was set up, about half the cabins were lightly wooded areas closer to the entrance of the camp. The other half, and the lodge bordered a well-kept field, with taller and unruly grass stretching further off to meet the forest on the other side of the field. When I was about 6, I was assigned to a cabin by the field. It was an A-frame cabin, and was swelteringly hot. The camp being nestled in the mountain could, oddly enough, afford complex kitchenware, but skimped on comfort for the campers. Most of the nights, I slept on the top of my sleeping bag as opposed to inside it. The bathrooms were separate from the cabin, and being 6 and very much afraid of the dark, especially in a dark, unfamiliar, lightless place, I often found myself terrified to sleep for fear of wetting the bed. Our counsellor Josh was really relaxed too. Looking back, he was probably the most chill counsellor I ever had. He was in the Army Reserve, and let us get away with a lot of things that never really flew after that year. The camp was pretty strict about rules. Lights out by 9, no venturing out of your cabin unless you use the bathroom. You couldn't even buy more than 1 soda from the commissary. Josh taught us that some rules are better left broken. At least that way you experience more out of life. As the weeks progressed, I found myself becoming more courageous. It was to the point where I was brave enough to venture a few feet away from my cabin at night to pee. On our last night, Josh proposed we spend the night in the field. We would pretend to go to bed at lights out. The staff would walk around with headlights and make sure everyone was in their beds, and then sneak out when we no longer saw the headlamps of wandering staff. We snuck out a little early and were startled by a straggler staffer. Josh hissed at us to get down on the ground near the bushes to blend in with the darkness. The staffer didn't seem to notice us in their peripheral, but he seemed frantic by the way he was running towards the staff lodge. I noticed his panicked and clumsy footfalls as he ran to the cabin for the night, thinking, amused at how a grown man could be afraid of the dark too. We settled down by the tall grass, and when my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the stars above shone down on us, and it was as if I was looking into the cosmos itself. Josh was making some speech about how the stars were made by God, but I just ignored it and gazed up, comforted by the vague mischief we caused and the camaraderie I now shared with my cabin mates. Josh said he would wake us before the morning bell so we wouldn't get in trouble. I don't know when I fell asleep. Josh was talking all about creation, and suddenly, deafening silence only interrupted by the gentle sway of the tall grass in the breeze. I don't know what would have woken me up, but the sight of the stars and the gentle sound of the grass was luring me back to sleep. Before I could fall back asleep, I heard it. A gentle crunch in the tall grass. I was panicked, but when I didn't hear the sound of the second time, I calmed myself down, telling myself it was just a rabbit. A second crunch, this time a little heavier. My eyes flew open, and I slowly turned on my side to face my other cabin mates to see if they'd woken too. If there happened to be a mountain lion, I didn't want to become a target by making any sudden movements. The crunching sound became more frequent, and sounded as if it was coming closer, as if someone or something was at first trying to be sneaky, but gave up halfway. I was on my side, face to face with one of my cabin mates named Cody, and my back to the long grass. Behind me, the crunching got closer and louder. I was tearing up in unbridled fear. If I got up, it might go away, but on the off chance it didn't, would it attack me? Would this be my last night alive? As my thoughts raced and the footsteps got closer, I felt as if I was being watched by a sinister presence. Just as I was about to get up and bolt, Cody stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered and opened wide in fear as he looked past me and to whatever the thing was behind me. Laboured heavy breathing came through the grass behind me. Cody was considering running, I could tell. I softly shook my head, my eyes probably betraying my own fear. He gulped, and another one of our cabin mates let out a soft groan in his sleep. I could feel the eyes of whatever was behind me lift its whole boring gaze off me for a moment and my other cabin mate. Shivering uncontrollably, I felt like I was going to witness something gruesome. The thing behind me let out a soft guttural growl, sounding oddly human, but yeah, bestial. I could sense it tense up as if to attack. Before I could, however, some coyotes yipped off in the distance, drawing the beast's attention away from us. The footfall sounded as if it was retreating to the forest, and Cody's eyes seemed a little relaxed. We waited what felt like hours before Cody breathed to me, "Do you think it's gone?" I nodded, but he could see that I wasn't even convinced myself. We both stayed awake all night and hardly spoke a word at breakfast. Before we left for the year, I asked Cody what he saw, and he explained that he saw the body of an excessively skinny man. His hands weren't his own, rather ended like dog paws with long, retractable claws. He didn't have a human head, or if he did, it was hidden by what appeared to be the head of a stag. The only other person Cody told about the creature was Josh, but Josh thought he was just spreading another rumour and played it off. I never saw Cody back at camp, and we lost contact. Josh deployed in Iraq, and unfortunately lost his life in 2001. There's a flagpole erected in honour of Josh in the middle of the field where we slept. I've been known to have some pretty awful nightmares, and I always just thought that's exactly what it was, until I got more interested in cryptids. The world is a large and scary place, and while the campgrounds were especially gorgeous, I don't think I'll ever return if it was a skinwalker like I think it is. Since I left, there's been disappearances here and there throughout the years, and I wonder if anyone would ever believe me.
This happened about a year ago. It still haunts me to this day. Back when I'm in middle school, I lived next door to a small neighbourhood. All I had to do was hop the fence and I'd be in the neighbourhood where all my friends are, where we are all between the ages of 12 and 13, and there were 5 of us. One of the houses where we were always had a backyard on the edge of the woods. We had created trails throughout it, completed with bridges over the creek that led to a reservoir of sorts where all the rainwater went, as well as the water that drained from the sewers. I say sewers, but it's a runoff from the street, and we use the tunnels under the road during intense games of manhunt. Anyway, we called that place the wall. The wall backed up quite literally to a house in the neighbourhood, and the next street over, we could clearly see houses through the trees in any direction we looked, so it's not like we're even far. Besides the trail we took, there was a main exit along the fence at the house aforementioned that led straight into the heart of the neighbourhood. Now, the wall was right by the street over. On our side, where the wall sat, there were 3 houses. One of them houses lived a well-known police officer whose kids were actually friends with us. The opposite side had a massive farmland to the left and a heavily wooded area to the right, complete with its own empty, boarded up, creepy house that couldn't be seen from the road unless it's winter. No one had ever lived there, or at least in the last 3 years that we knew of. So like I said, and I'm trying to paint the picture here so you can understand, we were very, very close to the other homes, which makes this story an odd one. One of my friends and I, just the 2 of us, decided to go to the wall, taking the familiar trails through the woods, and we made it to the wall. Weeks prior to this, the group of us had been trying to make a bridge so we can continue our work. Between picking up branches and heaving stones, we noticed that something's coming from the woods across the street. It's a man. This man was dressed head to toe in camouflage, typical hunting gear that I've seen before. The weirdest thing was he had a shotgun in his hands, in a residential area. Luckily, we noticed him before he notices us, and I'm so glad we did. When he notices us, his eyes locked on both of us and his pace begins to quicken, and he made a beeline to us. He never said a word or even lowered his weapon. It was just in his hands, ready at any given moment. We snap out of it, take the exit, sprinting into the heart of the neighbourhood, running straight to my friend's house to tell someone. We tell her dad, and he immediately goes to check it out, but finds no one, not a trace. I don't know where or who that man was, but her dad wasted no time, going there in seconds. The wooded area where the man came from was not large, at least not large enough to ever consider hunting on, and it was definitely not hunting land. It's an extremely residential area with an elementary school no less than 3 minutes away. I never understood why the man was there, especially since there's a cop who lives there. All I know is that he was up to no good, and he probably did something terrible and may have been escaping. It's a terrifying accident that we encountered him.
I'm a 20-year-old man from Mexico. For some background, my family and I live in a certain state in Mexico. It's been known for drug violence, but my family never was really affected by it. So I unwisely thought that my family was immune to all that stuff. This incident that I'm sharing in this story totally awoke me from that fantasy. For some more information for the readers, I live in a multi-generation household with 3 parents, 3 siblings, my paternal grandfather, 2 paternal aunts, along with both of their husbands, 1 paternal uncle and his wife, 1 maternal aunt, she has a boyfriend that doesn't live with us, 1 maternal uncle, he's single, and 5 cousins. It's a pretty crowded house, but I manage, barely at times. Around 9 years ago, during spring break, some American friends that were also business partners came to visit my family. The American family composed of a father and his girlfriend, along with their 2 children. The kids' names were Mary, age 19, and Jarifo, who was my age at the time. I was fairly good friends with Jarifo, while Mary usually hung out with my older cousins. Our families decided to go on a camping trip out in the desert, but both our families were quite fond of extreme adventuring, so we wanted to find some remote location in the desert. The less people in the location, the more thrilling our camping would be in our minds. So me, my dad, my older brother, 2 cousins, Jarifo's father, Mary, and a few of my aunts and uncles set off camping. Once we found a wonderful camping spot, we set up our stuff. Me and Jarifo started getting bored sitting around the campfire, so without telling the adults, we decided to go on a little hike. A very stupid mistake, but we were nothing more than young 11-year-old kids. We just wanted to have an adventure on our own, and we thought we were invincible. Man, that didn't end well at all. While me and Jarifo were hiking out, we managed to get lost, not a surprise to anyone at all. As we were walking, we had totally lost track of where we were. We wandered helplessly around the desert, screaming as loud as we could, hoping that our families or some other campers would hear us. This kept us for around 3 hours, before we almost lost all hope of rescue. It was starting to get extremely dark and very cold. We suddenly came across some sort of human activity several yards away. Jarifo and I managed to pick out around 6 or 7 trucks. When we got closer, we could easily see around 24 men hanging around. From what we could tell, they were composed of a bunch of Latino and white guys. All the white guys had racist tattoos all over their bodies. One especially creepy dude had a skull tattoo on his face, while obviously other stuff was tattooed on the head of the other guy. The Latino men were similarly heavily tattooed, but I can't remember what they looked like now. The men were all armed with assault rifles. Me and Jarifo exchanged confused glances. The lighting was quite dark, but I could easily see that the Hispanic guys were handing over white bags to the white men. Obviously this was some sort of drug deal between the Mexican cartel and some American gang. I have heard several stories of such things happening, but I never imagined seeing something like that in person. Jarifo whispers to me that we need to get out of there before they saw us. We tried to scurry out as fast as quietly possible. This totally failed, as one of the Mexican gunmen spotted us and pointed us out to his buddies. The American and Mexican drug dealers started to shoot at us. Bullets were flying and crashing all around us. Our adrenaline kicked in and then we ran out the wind. I felt one bullet graze my side, but I kept running. Jarifo was shot in the stomach and he fell to the ground clutching his wound. He let out the most blood-curdling scream imaginable, the scream that still haunts me to this day. I knew that if I went to his aid, I would have been killed too, so I was forced to leave him behind. When I glanced back, a Mexican drug dealer dressed up as a trashy cowboy walked up to Jarifo. He then finished him off. No time for tears, I kept running. I prayed to every god that I could think of to save me. I was totally convinced that I was going to die that night, and my family would never find me. Slowly scumbling to fatigue, I glanced towards my right, and I spot a river 10 feet away. Knowing that this was my best chance of escaping my pursuers, despite the risk of drowning, I jumped into the river. I was never a stellar swimmer, but with the danger I was in, I suddenly became an Olympic swimmer that would have made Michael Phelps proud. The drug dealers continued to fire at me, but I eventually swam far enough away they gave up. I swam for another hour before I went back into dry land. Afterwards, I found a cave to settle into for the rest of the night. 3 hours later, I woke up to a flashlight in my face. For a second, I thought the drug dealers had found me again, but I was relieved to find out that it was simply just a rescue party sent to me by Jarifo's family. I was airlifted to hospital and treated for my wounds. After my recovery, I explained what happened to my and Jarifo's families. A sympathetic police officer explained to us that we probably witnessed a drug deal between the Juarez cartel and the Aryan Brotherhood. He then advised us to leave before the cartel tried any further attacks on us. Jarifo's family called off the vacation and went home the next day. Not wanting further retaliation from the cartels, my own family moved to the Osakata state. So far so good, we've never had any trouble from the cartels again. Jarifo's body was never found. I have no idea what happened to the dealers that attacked us that night, but I wish them the worst. I still have no contact with Jarifo's family. To this day, I still get nightmares about the whole incident. It seems like this will be a chip on my shoulder for a long time.
This weekend, I went hiking with my boyfriend and a few of his friends. The five of us were heading up to a not so popular mountain trail that's about 10 minutes long up on a small lake. We saw two couples on their way down, but no one passed us up on the way. The trail isn't super easy and wildlife is pretty common. We saw a moose about 3 miles in, so we're all on guard for more mooses or a mountain lion or anything that can cause a problem. After the moose, we ran into a small patch of snow that's maybe 100 feet along the trail. Past the snow, we walk another 20 to 30 yards and find a deer's rib cage and spine. We gather around it, not saying much, and one of the guys turns it over with a stick. It's picked clean. After we stand up, an older guy is standing like 10 feet away from us. Not sure if one of us heard him or saw him walk up. It's like he just appeared. And after we make eye contact, he just turns over, jumps over the little creek, cutting through 18 inches of snow, running up the side of the mountain, disappearing.
People like to warn you about the dangers of nature when you go camping, but that's not what you should be afraid of. No, not exactly. I went camping with my girlfriend in a place called Nightfall Forest. As you might expect from the name, it was dark and a foreboding place, with areas where the trees grew so thick that very little sunlight could get through their overgrown branches. Lacey, my girlfriend, and a biologist in training, went to study the ecosystem of a particular area of the forest, known for its unique fungi and bacteria. It was a lot of science worse than me, but a break from work sounded great, so I decided to tag along. She moved out, set up her instruments, as I set up camp not too far from the river. It was cool, a gentle breeze blowing over the camp as I hammered the last nails into the soil below. I had to admit it was nice. Nobody screaming at me about deadlines, no phones ringing every few minutes to complain about a product that I had no part in making, no cars honking at traffic or neighbours yelling loudly over the noise of their TVs. Nothing but the sound of the wind breaking through the trees, the trickle of water over rocks, and a few birds that I couldn't quite pinpoint in the dense foliage above. "What are you smiling at?" Lacey walked over and sat down beside me on a half-rotten log. It creaked under our combined weight. I was smiling. "You were?" "Just enjoy the quietness and solitude, I guess. It's really nice out here, isn't it?" She grabbed my hand and kissed the knuckles. "Don't worry, you can get back to your keyboard tapping and smog-infested city in just a few short days." That night, we cooked a fish Lacey caught over the fire she built, and it struck me how little I knew of surviving in the wilderness. I was a city boy, born and bred. This was foreign land to me. We made love for the first time under the stars, what little of them shone through the trees above us, and then retired to the tent. I was beat. It was around 2 AM when a sound outside woke me. Dry leaves crackled and branches snapped. I looked over and Lacey was gone, and a brief moment I panicked. Something took her. A wild animal came in and was dragging her away right this second. A crazy old hermit was living in the woods, and he abducted her as penance for trespassing on his land. Endless scenarios ran through my head as a shadow appeared in front of the tent. This is it, I thought. This is where the old crazy hermit comes and murders me and rips out my liver for tomorrow's breakfast. The zipper began to rise slowly. Each metal tooth it ran over echoed through the tent, through my soul. Inch by inch it rose, getting stuck on something halfway. It was too dark to see. I thumbed around for something, anything I could to defend myself. All I could find was my pillow. All the tools were outside. God, I was an idiot. The zipper broke free of its snag, and I rose again, edging closer and closer to my impending doom. I grabbed my pillow and swallowed. At the very least, I could confuse the intruder and escape into the forest. If it was too dark for me to see, that meant it was too dark for them as well. I braced myself. 3, 2, 1. Jesus, you scare me. It was just Lacey. That's my line. What the hell are you doing? I had to pee. Did you have to pull the zip of the tent like a serial killer? I didn't want to wake you. Too late. I'm awake. Fuck me. I thought I was about to lose my liver. Your liver, what? Lacey got into her sleeping bag and fluffed up her pillow. Never mind. Well, now that I'm awake, I'm gonna go pee too. Have fun, she said. I made my way out into the darkness. Crickets chirps and the trickle of water over rocks continued, unabated. It was both unnerving and soothing at the same time. I finished my business, and as I turned to return to the tent, I froze. I wasn't alone. This wasn't Lacey trying to sneak her way back into the tent without waking me. There was someone standing in the trees, just a few meters away. It was too dark to see anything but a vague outline, but there was no mistaking it. There was a person right there. I could pick up a rock and hit them with it. Did they see me? I couldn't tell which direction the person was facing. They were just standing there, like a statue. I stood still, waiting to see if the figure could make a move. I was sure I could hear the beating of my heart in my chest. Why wasn't it moving? There was a cry in the distance. We both turned towards the sound, and then the figure turned to look at me, his eyes glinting in the darkness before it took off running. I scrambled for the tent and yanked the zipper down as hard as I could, forcing it to get stuck several times. "What are you doing?" Lacey asked, rubbing her eyes. I put a shaky finger to my lips and crawled into my sleeping bag. We waited, listening. There was another cry, fainter this time, and then silence. The thing was gone. "There was something out there," I whispered, unable to hide the fear in my voice. Lacey sat up. "What do you mean? Someone's out there? Who?" I shook my head. There was a cry, a scream, something, and they took off. I left out the part about the eyes. No need to worry her or make her think I was insane. I was a city boy. She would put it down to the unfamiliarity of the woods and not take me seriously. Camping virgin or not, the thing I saw, it wasn't human. The morning came without a wink of sleep, and Lacey went off to check her instruments. "Do you want some breakfast?" I called out. "I'll eat later," she said. The forest felt cold, unwelcoming almost, like the eyes were watching me from every corner. I stood up, thinking to join Lacey as she did her rounds, but then it dawned on me that I had no idea where she was. I was setting up camp when she put her stuff out. I was alone. I made my way over to the trees, where I saw the figure the night before. There were footprints in the mud, leading in the same direction where the figure ran off. I didn't imagine it. I followed them for a few meters before they disappeared. It wasn't that the mud ended, the footprints just stopped. I needed to think of an excuse before Lacey got back, so we could get the hell out of here. She could call me a chicken all she wanted, but at least I'd been a live chicken. But as the morning went on, there was no sign of her. I tried my hand at fishing, but all it brought was frustration and even more time to think. I tried to set up booby traps around the camp, but I was no Boy Scout. I didn't know the first thing about setting up a snare. Mud squelched under my feet and twigs snapped. How on earth did someone get so close to our camp without us hearing them? I couldn't make 2 steps without alerting half the forest. Several hours passed and no sign of Lacey. I bit my nails and wore a path in the grass beside our tent. Our phones were off and unable to receive reception out here, regardless. I knew my way back to the car, but that was it. If I went looking for Lacey, chances are I'd get myself lost and I'd be in even more trouble. But then a scream drew me from my thoughts. "Lacey!" I took off running. Getting lost didn't matter if Lacey ended up dead or injured instead. I pushed my way through the trees and branches, scraping my arms and face. There was another scream to my left. I turned, sliding in the mud before picking up speed again. The thing I saw outside the tent, it had her. It was all I could think. I slipped and fell several times, covering myself in mud, and then I heard a third scream, this time to my right. It was playing with me. I fell to my knees exhausted. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back, no idea where Lacey was or even if she was okay. It lured me out here, away from the camp, and now I could do as it pleased with Lacey. It was all I could think of, rational or otherwise. Lacey, I had to save Lacey. I stood up and ran in the direction I came from, at least the direction I thought I came from. Panic was settling in, and the forest looked the same no matter how far I ran. I could have been running in circles for all I knew, maybe I was. My heart jumped in my throat. Footprints, I found footprints. If I followed them back, I could reach the campsite. I didn't miss a beat as I leapt over rocks and branches. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't scared. Then something moved in front of me, and I was on my back in the mud. Lacey! She looked at me confused. What are you doing? I extracted myself from the muck and grabbed her by the shoulders. That's my line. Are you okay? I heard screams. Her brow furrowed. I didn't hear anything. Are you okay? My head pounded, my chest ached, my brain was clouded with fear and confusion. You didn't hear those screams just before? They were loud enough I could hear them from the camp. I thought it was you. At that she smiled. Oh, you're so sweet. But I was just checking on my instruments. I didn't hear anything at all. Really? She nodded. You're probably just tired. You didn't get much sleep after all. Maybe. A sleepless night wasn't new to me, but it didn't explain why I heard something screaming when she didn't. Come on, let's go back to camp. I'll whip up a lunch special of canned beans and filtered river water. I attempted a smile that never quite reached my lips and followed her back. The forest was too quiet. My nerves refused to settle down. We ate lunch in silence. My muddy clothes hung by the tent, and all I could think was that I didn't want to be out here any longer. Camping wasn't for me. We were supposed to stay a few more days, but I wasn't sure if I could make it through the next night. Lacey. Yeah, she asked, stuffing her face with beans like she'd never eaten a meal before in her life. I want to get out of here. You want to go for a walk or something? No, out of here entirely. I want to go home. She snickered. Now you're just being silly. We just got here and I haven't finished my recordings. I felt bad, but I couldn't do it. Please. She looked at me. You serious? Yeah, I am. She considered it and then sighed. Is this about the screams? I shook my head. It's not just that. I know you didn't see them, but I saw someone last night. Right here, by the trees. I don't like this place. It's dangerous. Who's to say that tonight they won't return and murder us for real? I know you just wanted to do some research, but that research isn't going to be any good if we're both dead. I don't like this place, and I just don't. I just want to go home, please. She finished her plate of beans and set it down to the log beside her. You owe me big time. I couldn't help hide the smile on my face. Anything at all, you name it. Yeah, well, first I have to go get all my gear, I suppose. One day's worth of results is better than nothing. And you, sir, you get to break down the tent and put everything away. No problem, it'll be done before you know it. My spirits lifted. No doubt she'd give me shit the entire way home, but I could deal with that. Because we'd be alive and we'd be safe. That was all that mattered. I gathered our gear up in record time and was waiting when Lacey returned. We loaded up, I said an internal F you, and hope I never see you again, to the forest, and we went on our way. Did you manage to get anything from your tests? I tried to make conversation as we walked so I wouldn't have to think about how creepy the forest was. The sun was setting and it would be dark soon. I hated winter. Early nights suck. No, not very much, nah. But it's fine, I can come out here and get some by myself. I scratched my nose and avoided looking at her. This was the right thing to do. I wasn't imagining things, I just wasn't. I'm sorry, I know you're looking forward to this trip. Look, if you're gonna mope the whole way home, just stop right now. I agreed to go back with you, didn't I? She did, yeah. Now stop fussing over it. Sorry. We walked in silence. The closer we got to the car, the more forest sprang to life. Birds sang, insects chirped, and the various creatures scuttled around the forest floor. The sound of several large animals stomping through the brush caught my attention, but I couldn't find them. As long as we didn't get in their way, we'd be fine. The sun disappeared behind the horizon, but the car was in sight, just a few more meters, and we'd— Josh! Lacey, a few steps ahead of me, stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to look at me in the gloom of dusk, her expression unreadable. Lacey's voice called out my name. Only Lacey, standing in front of me, wasn't the name who called it. It came from the trees to our right. What the hell? We need to go now, Lacey said. She didn't wait for an answer and picked up the pace towards the car. Josh, wait! Something came running out of the trees. It was Lacey. What the hell? Lacey, the original Lacey, turned around. There were two of them looking right at me. What the hell is going on? Lacey, the other Lacey, was covered in mud. I took a step back as she ran towards me. Josh, it's me! My eyes flickered back and forth between the two of them, and my back pressed into a tree. I went out to pee last night and something odd grabbed me. This thing isn't me. I didn't know what to believe. They were a mirror image of each other. I don't know what that thing is, but I can tell you that when I went out to pee last night, I most certainly wasn't grabbed. The non-messy Lacey looked at me, her eyes wide. And yeah, I agree, we really should get out of here now. The messy Lacey turned and jumped before I could say a word. The two Laceys fell in the mud, scratching and punching and kicking. I ran over, grabbed the nearest one and pulled her off. There was a growl deep in the forest. I swallowed. That wasn't a deer. There was no time for this. It was getting darker and colder by the second. I turned to Lacey on my right. "What did you get me for my 5th birthday?" "A red Matchbox car," she said without hesitation. I turned to Lacey on my left, pushing herself up out of the mud. "What did I want but not get for my birthday last year?" "A rainbow cake with buttercream frosting," she said, flicking the mud off the front of her pants. Both were correct. The red Matchbox car was a pride of my childhood, and it sat on my dresser at home. Only Lacey knew about the cake I wanted last year, but due to a mistake at the bakery, never got it. This was insane. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but I can't be the only one who heard that growl just now. Lacey, both Laceys look at me. A second later it was on us. A featureless man, like something moulded out of clay, ran for Lacey. Its eye glinted in the darkness, and it barreled into her full speed, sending them both tumbling to the ground. A scream barely had time to escape my lips before it was all over. The clay man ripped out her throat. Lacey, the other one beside me, screamed. The yellow eyes turned towards her, and then looked at me. A mistake was made. There weren't supposed to be two Laceys. Something fucked up the process. The clay man grabbed my wrist and began to charge before me. It grew taller, matching my height. The watch on my arm began to form on his. The bare chest morphed into my shirt and jacket. Its blank face became mine. Lacey screamed again. I pulled the creature away from her and we fell, hitting the ground hard. Mud clouded my vision. Mud, so much mud. It was on everything, working its way into every crevice in my body. I extracted my limbs and swung for the thing with my face. It grunted and grabbed my hair, pulling me back down. It pinned me to the ground, and as it adjusted to bear its full weight down on me, I lifted my knee. I kicked with all my might, sending the other me tumbling to the ground. I grabbed Lacey's hand and ran blindly for the car. "Get back here," the man yelled in my voice. I ran as fast as I could, not turning back. "Hey, don't leave me here!" I fumbled with the keys in my pocket. The car was just ahead. Lacey was dead. Was this my Lacey? There was no time to think about it. I pressed a button on my keys, relief flooding through me as I heard the familiar beep signifying the car was unlocked. I ran for the driver's side, while Lacey ran for the other. Our things could be replaced, but not our lives. I saw myself running for the car as I put the key in the ignition. Even more frightening than seeing the other Lacey in front of me was seeing myself. It was a perfect copy. It even ran with heavy feet like I did. The engine roared to life as the no longer clay version of myself jumped up onto the car. Lacey had her head in her hands, crying. I threw the car into reverse and watched as it went flying into the parking lot. I sped off, visions of myself running like a crazed Terminator with a limp in the rear-view mirror burning into my mind. Lacey said nothing as we drove the empty roads home. We both watched her, or at least the other version of her, die before our very eyes. But which Lacey was it? Did she even know herself? And now there was another version of me running around somewhere out there too. Both Laceys truly believe they were the original. It keeps me up at night sometimes wondering. I've never seen anything to doubt that the Lacey sleeping beside me isn't the one that I met when we were 17-year-olds and stupid kids with too much time on our hands. But I could see it in her eyes when they argued. They both believe they were the one and only true Lacey. They both have the same memories, the same features, the same scars, the same feelings and emotions. Somewhere out there is another version of me. Did he return to the woods, lost and confused, or is he figuring out his next move? Waiting for the right moment to get rid of the imposter inhabiting his house, sleeping in his bed and making love to his girlfriend. Sometimes I wonder though, in the quiet of the night when the world is asleep, am I really me? If we have the same memories and we both believe ourselves to be the one and only true version, how do I know that I'm the original? Even if he does come and kill me and take my place, how will I ever know? I won't, and that's the thing that worries me the most.